as a modern secular nation, we don't need to have theology in the public square. Well, Craig pushing back against that idea. He joins us now. Kia ora. Good morning.
Sure, Andrew. Yeah. So my thesis is that Australia is a secular religious country. Same for New Zealand. Ambitions to be secular, but actually very, very religious. And I want to point out something wonderful that our friend Friedrich Nietzsche said, that God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. And he said, how great do we have to be to have been pulled off such an amazing feat? We should become gods ourselves in light of this. But it's not true. It hasn't happened. God is not dead.
Well, to put it in a different sort of theological context, I mean, it's Ash Wednesday coming up this Wednesday. God was dead very briefly, but it didn't last, and that's why we're all Christians now, right?
A good point. He came back to life. He fought his way back to life, and he's doing the same since the 1960s. So when I grew up in Australia, I was thinking, I'm growing up in a secular country, and as a Christian, you have to keep your mouth shut. You can't say anything publicly because the public square is a spiritual wasteland. But and we had this wonderful thing called the secularization thesis right across the Western world in the 1960s.
Yep.
The secularization thesis said, look, the more modern a country became, the less religious it would become. So essentially all religions, particularly Christianity, would die out in the public square in countries like Australia and Aotearoa. That's not true. It hasn't happened. In fact, the reverse has happened. And all the research we have now says Australia may not be a more Christian place. It's a less Christian place than it used to be, but it's a more religious place than it used to be. More and more people have some form of spirituality or religion.
They've got a new term for this one. God's not dead. We're living in not postmodern, but post-secularity. That's a new term to me, Craig. Unpack that one for us.
Yeah, so the post-secular paradigm in Australia says essentially that we are not a secular space at all. We are beyond all that, and we're essentially desecularized. So we've become religious again. And this is true. I mean, Australia's immigration, by mass immigration, what we've imported into ourselves are the religions of the world. And so I'll give you one example, Andrew, from this past week. You recall a few weeks back, we talked about a couple of nurses in Bankstown that threatened an Israeli online influencer. Now, one of them has been charged with crimes, etc. An imam who's sort of like a school counsellor in a local high school in New South Wales that's got 90% Islamic students in it, spoke out online. He was told to work from home, so he was being disciplined by the education department in New South Wales. The students went out on the street, marched, protests, shouting Allah Akbar in the middle of Sydney, in Bankstown, at Granville, I should say, and he has been given back his job in 24 hours. He's back at work now. That is an example of what we mean by desecularization or post-secularity. The truth is that wouldn't have happened in Australia 40 years ago. Today, it's a reality. Religion is expressing its muscle socially and politically and publicly, and the governments of the world, or the governments in Australia at least, are responding accordingly and bowing the knee at times, a lot of times. So this is what post-secularity looks like.
There is some good news in amongst this. Now, I mean, as you mentioned, not all of the post-secularity is necessarily Christian, and particularly from an Australian point of view with immigration, the impact that is having on not just the demography, but on the spiritual demography of your nation. There's increasing influences of other faiths there, but at least you can have religious conversations, Craig.
You can, and that's the funny part. So that's the good news. We've given you the bad news side of the story at one level. Here's the good news side, is that anybody can go into the public square now and pretty much say anything. And we used to be told you couldn't argue your points on religious grounds. You had to find other grounds on which to argue them in public. That's just not the case anymore. So people are simply saying, this is what I believe, this is who I am, this is my religious identity. It's a kind of identity politics. And other people are going, well, we can't argue against that. What's missing, mate, is the courage of Christians to do this. We still are working off the old paradigm that be quiet and be in private and be over there in the corner and keep your religion to yourself. We still work as if we're in that world. Yeah. The Muslim doesn't, nobody else does, but we still do. So we have to retrain ourselves, I think, mentally to know that it's okay for us to speak as Christians in the public square as well.
I think there are some positive signs on the horizon in this regard, and you talked about that example of Muslim students taking to the streets to protest. That there seems to be an interest in spirituality and even Christian spirituality from a new generation of young people teaching us old dogs some tricks, perhaps.
Absolutely. And the Gen Zs, for example, who should be our mission field, the ones that we're really trying to save, ultimately, about 75% of them say, I want to learn more about Jesus across my lifestyle.
Wow.
My lifetime, sorry. I want to, I want to open a conversation about spirituality and religion. we call them now the open generation. They are not closed in the way their parents and grandparents were to Christianity or to anything. And that's the dangerous part, is that, if you believe in nothing, you'll fall for anything. And so they are open to anything. But having said that, it gives a tremendous missional opportunity for the church, which, let's face it, we are still the best resourced religious organization in the Western world. I mean, the fact is we're way better prepared than Islam is. And Islam has the same challenges too. About 24% of young Muslims in Australia are losing their faith, which is a shock to Islam, and something they're not as prepared for as we are as Christians in terms of learning how to deal with that.
But hey, as second generation immigrants, I suppose they're not quite as used to it yet as perhaps people that have come from a Western or a Christian background. We just kind of go, we just take it for granted that that's the way it's going to be within a secular society. I just wanted to circle back. You talked about spirituality as an identity. And I mean, this gets slightly problematic because, let's face it, identity politics are a little bit problematic. And you can just choose what flavour of ice cream you want to be this week with your spirituality, your sexuality, or some other type of identity. Is there an opportunity in this, though, that, if I was choosing my identity, Christian would come pretty near the top of the list, Craig. Absolutely. Is there an opportunity to perhaps use identity politics as a way of communicating faith?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think we're more or less forced to in many ways. There's no way around it that we have to own the fact that we're Christians, and that's more than skin deep for us. That is something that goes to the core of who and what we are. Yeah. And that's part of our identity in that sense. So we are making similar claims to the identity politics people. Hopefully we're not doing it for manipulative or virtue signaling reasons. There's no virtue gathered by saying you're a Christian publicly. There just isn't. Yeah. So we're not doing it for the wrong motives. We're simply saying, look, this is who we are. This is how our lifestyle. Goes, and we just can't. We can't abandon that. That's who we are. And look, the Muslim is giving us a great example. He's showing us the way, because he's not afraid to say publicly, this is who I am, and I expect you to respond accordingly. I expect you to live as if I really am a Muslim. We just haven't had the courage and the strength to do that as Christians, but I think we're going to be forced to anyway, in modern Australia at least, and I'm sure in New Zealand too. We're going to be forced to have to speak publicly, because our public square is now so fragmented that there's no way for Christians to avoid engagement.
And honestly, as people of other faiths are exercising their freedom of religion, which is a basic human right, and it's certainly even respected by a secular society, again, possibly an opportunity to say, hey, I'm a Christian just because I'm a white guy, and Christianity is perceived by some to be the religion of the oppressor. I still have freedom of religion. I still have that human right, and you should respect that, and I should be able to defend that.
Yeah, absolutely. And more, we need to do that, because what's missing in our cultures today is, we've got all this public presence of religion, but what's missing is the glue that binds us together. Yeah. Countries like Australia and New Zealand lived off the fact they were vaguely Christian countries. Everybody had a similar worldview. It's just not true anymore. And so what's happening is our social cohesion is breaking down. And I see this very clearly now, just in moving back to Australia. Yeah. Social cohesion in Australia is going to be a battleground for the next 30 years. It's a struggle. It's at all levels. It's economic. The fact is, older Australians hold all the resources. Young Australians can't get a home. They can't get moving forward with their lives. The struggles at that level, the struggles between religious groups. Our social cohesion is a problem. It's breaking down. And the old stories about what Australia was or what New Zealand was aren't holding us together anymore. So I don't see a way out for Christians getting involved again in the public square. We can't hide and say, well, we're religious, we don't get involved in. I'm not even saying politics. I'm just saying publicly. Yeah. Letting, when you go to your school or your school board meeting or whatever, just acknowledging that we have a particular worldview and story that motivates us and gives meaning to our lives, serious meaning to our lives, and for our children as well, and how we want them raised. And there's just no way to avoid these discussions now, I think.
One of the ways in which this new post-secularity is impacting Australian headlines in particular is, unfortunately, it's anti-Semitism. Actually, this is the fruit of post-secularity, is a rise in anti-Semitism within Australia. Again, perhaps a clear opportunity to say religion doesn't need to mean hate. Actually, there's another faith out in the mix which is a part of this society which doesn't lead to anti-Semitic conclusions.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. I think that's the Christian side of this, is that we can support the people that are being persecuted here. But it's quite shocking. Australia currently, Andrew, looks like 1930s Germany. I mean, there's horrible anti-Semitic issues going on every day, and you read about them and hear about them every day. And it's stunning because we've never had this issue before. There's always been an undercurrent of anti-Semitism in Australia because of the Anglo-Saxon thing, but it was very subtle and probably didn't feel subtle to Jews, but it was largely very subtle. What we've got now is essentially a religious debate imported from the Middle East, but straight from the Bible. I mean, that's the interesting thing. The Australian public square right now is dominated by discussions about the fact that God said to Abraham, "Hey, buddy, have I got some land for you?" and promised him that land. And some other folks called Palestinians have said, "No, it's our land." And now that's become the central social problem in modern day Australia, and probably will be in New Zealand soon enough as well. So you go to yourself, that is bizarre when you think about it, that a biblical problem from thousands of years ago with a history now is defining our post-secular moment in Australia. But you're right, where Christians need to stand is obviously with justice on all sides, but particularly with the Jews as a small and, with a history of being a persecuted minority. And their story is linked to our story, like it or not. I mean, there's no sense to the gospel without Jesus being a Jew and without Moses, without the children of Israel. So, it doesn't mean we have to write a blank check for the Israeli state. We've talked about that before, but siding with the Jew and supporting the Jews as people of faith and as the children of Abraham, I don't see any way around that as Christians. They're part of our story and part of our journey, and our faith makes no sense without them.
Hey, we are heading into the season of Lent, Ash Wednesday coming up this Wednesday. We're also heading into the season of Ramadan. And I mean, quite a contrast, actually, with the way in which our secular, our post-secularity in both Australian and New Zealand cultures is responding to Ramadan and to Lent coming up. Some quite different responses at a political level, Craig.
Yeah, well, isn't there? Well, we have had the Prime Minister of New Zealand come out and send a wonderful set of well wishes to Muslims celebrating Ramadan, and I have no problem with that. This is a plural country, but I notice he never does this for Christians at Easter. So I think I'm feeling a little bit left out. I'd like to see the same, and wouldn't it be wonderful to see Christopher with his head, his nice bald head with a nice big black ash mark on his forehead with a cross on it, turning up to Parliament, and maybe you could get Winston to do the same, and David Seymour, and I don't know about David Seymour, but maybe Winston.
We can pray. Yeah,
we can pray. But look, go for it. Lent's a great season. I used to love watching Catholics wandering around with black crosses on their foreheads, and I used to acknowledge everyone and say, God bless them. And I think it's wonderful. And that's the kind of public expression of faith that may seem exotic, but I actually think is a wonderful way to say, hey, guys, this is who I am and I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose to have the courage, and look, I'm not accusing our Prime Minister of not having courage, but possibly some bad advice. That he's wanting to desperately not appear too Christian in the public space. But yeah, Christopher Luxon, if you're listening at the moment, we'd love to see an Ash Wednesday cross on your forehead this Wednesday. Amen. It would be a positive statement. But I mean, this is the sort of opportunity that post-secularity brings, Craig, because with Ash Wednesday, it gives us an opportunity to say, when somebody says, oh, you got a little bit of smudge on your head, you can talk about what that is and what it means to you.
Christopher was willing to take a red dot on his head from the Hindu temple, so I'm not sure why he wouldn't be willing to take a Catholic cross anyway. Or a
exactly.
Cross.
But
anyway,
even with the Ramadan situation, I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity. If you've got Muslim neighbours or people in your community who are celebrating Ramadan, a wonderful opportunity to engage with them, with what they believe, to share what we believe, to take our faith back into the public square. And hey, I know for a lot of people, Ramadan is a wonderful opportunity to pray for our Muslim neighbours, to pray for blessing for them in our communities, not necessarily engage with the whole spiritual aspects of the process, but an opportunity to reach across the aisle and to talk about the reasons we have for what we believe.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have any choice. If we're going to live together at peace in the public square of Aotearoa or Australia, we're going to have to pray for our neighbours, and our neighbours will not hold the same beliefs as us, and we're going to have to learn to live with that and be comfortable with that. So I agree with you, and I think Ash Wednesday, for example, and I know there'll be some beautiful services going on across Auckland and other parts of New Zealand.
Yeah.
Invite a friend. Just say, look, come with me. You know, anyone that had a Christian background years and years ago, or maybe their parents were Christian, there's nothing wrong with saying, come to an Ash Wednesday service and get yourself marked with the cross and just start. It's amazing to me, mate. I was preaching at a church yesterday in the country here in Queensland, and just about everybody I met and prayed for and talked to was essentially a first-generation Christian and probably got saved in the last 5 years.
Wow.
So I'm seeing this. This is amazing that people are flooding back to faith. And so we just need to be courageous now and boldly say it's that we've got the true story. And when people respond to it, their lives change. Jesus changes lives. And so we need to just be courageous now and go, this is it. You know, our public square is a completely religious place. It's okay for us to be out there.
That'd be a great thing to give up for Lent, Craig, just saying. A fear of speaking out about your faith in a public place. Great thing to put at the top of the list to give up for Lent this year. Hey, fantastic conversation and really encouraged by the work that you're doing in this space. Craig, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, mate. So good to see you again. Cheers.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.